Hello, this is Cryptolyze. I hope you are well. This Wednesday, 15 November 2023, we meet today to talk crypto, to talk BTC. As usual, there's still quite a bit of news. We'll start right away. As a reminder, you always have the possibility of having free access to the educational course, which is a 60-hour training course worth €400, which allows you to learn blockchain, crypto investment, technical analysis, trading, everything to become profitable. Through 130 videos, 400 pages of guides, quizzes to find out where you are in your progress, and all for free. To have access to this lifelong training, simply use the platform of one of our partners. Everything is explained in the comments and descriptions. I talked about it yesterday. The rumor of validation of the BlackRock ETF on XRP was therefore false news, fake news. But it is not going to happen that simply. A priori, the authorities are investigating, and I think it will end very badly for the people who will be caught for having made this false rumor. As a reminder, XRP made more 10 and less 10 almost in a few hours, a few minutes. So obviously it hurt a lot with a big liquidation pulse. So it's really market manipulation, and they're at risks doing really badly, so we're monitoring what's happening. But once again, strangely, on some false other rumors, there is no agreement investigation, or in any case, not as official, not as strong. The false rumor of validation of the BlackRock ETF, in this case, there was no one who was charged, and we haven't heard from. Rumors related to this are there two measuring points or two types of communication. It's up to you to form your own opinion. Concerning OKX, we still have some nice news. They are going to launch a ZK Layer 2 Xzone, which will be on Polygon CDK. So the CDK is the development kit for building blockchains based on Polygon, namely Polygon. They announced the notion of Polygon 2, which is mainly an SDK, therefore a development kit to be able to build a multitude of blockchains which will be interfaced directly with their equipment, with in fact a complete ecosystem in which we have easy access to everything, and without which we do not need to take the trouble to build a blockchain in ZK rollup on Ethereum, which is really very strong. I had already explained to you that Polygon 2 would certainly revolutionize a large part of the development, in fact of the blockchain and the evolution of the blockchains of layers. 2 in ZK proof. In this case, we are seeing that it is accelerating. We have some other news which is rather positive on Polygon. I have already made lots of videos around this, and in this case, we were going to wait to see the We also have another piece of news, who is offering a 5% offer. So it's 5% yield interest on the USD. So I believe it's the USD. It's 5% to 5% on the USD. 3.81 on the euro, namely that it is on the uninvested amounts in which you have not dealt, which are not used. No margin in a trade you have. And that's only valid for 90 days after opening the account, so that's always something to take care of. It's gross as usual. Don't forget that you'll have to withdraw the taxes, and I put in the comments and description the link to the XTB presentation video that I made to you last time. We continue in the news. We have JP Morgan who tells us above all do not buy the elections. We are overvalued, namely that we made a huge candle yesterday. At the time we had this news, they defined that we had already done 7% in November, and that at some point we were going to have to take a breather, and that it was just a short-term volatility movement. So we know very well, and we always pay close attention to the news from JP Morgan. We are always more or less the opposite of what is happening. So that means that we will potentially continue to push for a certain time, and we will see it in the technical part. Conversely, we have UBS, the banking giant, which expects a recession and a faster-than-expected drop in rates in the USA over the next year. They are targeting 275 basis points less in 2024, so that really means a very aggressive decline. So that implies behind a pure and hard economic problem, and in which we would indeed have a start of recession in the USA. This is a bit like the scenario that I have been defending to you for some time, with a false recession, or in all case a recession which risks being quite rapid, and a rapid reaction from the Fed. To see, we will discuss it in all cases Saturday in the weekly. We come back to yesterday's figure, which was very important. We went down to 3. 2% versus the forecast, which was at 3. 3% in terms of inflation. We are slowly and tenderly getting closer to the 3%, namely that the Fed's target. I remind you that it is still the 2%, although there is a great possibility that in the years to come it will no longer be 2% but 3% of inflation is targeted. We recall that the very principle of inflation in relation to that and why it is targeted at these 2% is quite simply that to have growth, you must have inflation. In any case, this is the principle that is defended around the fiat system. I'm not going to take too much time on it, but I think I'll make a video for you on it. But in principle, if we don't have inflation, we don't have growth, and we don't have an increase in the world economy. And therefore, we must have inflation, which must be controlled to have growth. And so, at a given moment, we fixed 2%, which is a number which was fixed completely randomly, and in which we could say to ourselves, well, at that moment, we will perhaps move on to 3%, because you understand 3% C is better. And at the same time, 3% is perhaps also more maintainable, especially if we have to lower rates. You can imagine that if we are in a recession and we lower rates inflation to 2%, we can forget, and therefore at that moment, we will be able to have a reassessment of this inflation. We will come back to it in all cases at the level of these figures on the weekly. What we must remember in relation to this is that we still have inflation which remains relatively sticky, therefore which still remains relatively high despite the fact that we are on an energy level which is equivalent compared to what we experienced the previous year. Therefore, in the same month and at the same energy level, we're pretty much the same in terms of average prices, and yet we still find ourselves with relatively high prices, relatively high inflation, namely that we had less 2.5 on energy, yes, a big fall, therefore a breather. But if it hadn't been for that, that also implies that we would have inflation that would be much higher because we still have increases in inflation. When we look at transport, we are at 0.3, still on medical care shelter. We're at 0.3, so it's still very bad. We can't go below. We can't stay in 0, so obviously we're going to feel it a lot. And if we look at October as a whole, we're actually on all items at 0. So it is implied that we remain the same compared to the previous year. So that implies that we increase the rates to remain the same. Let's think we'll discuss it again on Saturday 13. 30 above the market reacted very well. Understand why we had this reaction? We have the fact that the rate is rather positive. So that is to say that we went below the expected this, which is rather interesting. It implies that behind us we have the policy which works well at the level of the Fed. So we continue to put pressure on inflation. So this also means that there will be no increase rates at party level despite the fact that we have the 10-year U.S. Treasury bond rate which continues to fall. So that means there will be no increase by the end of the year. But also it means when we go into detail, as I have just done to you, that the descent is more complicated than expected. So that also means at a given moment that there may be a risk in the economy, and which will perhaps in fact have a faster shift, therefore a faster pivot at the level of the party concerning 2024, and the market is in the process of pricing it, of integrating it. Hence the fact that we have a very strong upward acceleration over one day, which is quite rare on this type of asset. I remind you that we are on classic equity. We made almost 2% a candle. So here we are really in a very strong acceleration process, and we completely broke my retest. So for me, I'm going to aim for breaking the levels of 4,560. If we break this high there we really have a validation for an upward continuity to potentially go for an extension with here an A, B, C for a breath, and therefore there we would potentially have a new 88th compared to this year. On the bullish acceleration that we would have, so we would have 5 waves of bearish impulse, 3 of retracement for a retest, and then we will reevaluate. Will we continue to push or not at that time? It's going to be interesting to be able to reevaluate that, and in any case, it's going to be the weekly closing, which will give us the tone, so obviously we'll come back to it on Saturday, 13:30. Oil, we have our little rebound, which is still relatively mixed. We see that we are going to retest part of the imbalance here. When we look at daily, we see that up to the level of 80, we have again this part of imbalance. So we have between 79, 75, and 80, a little bit of imbalance to fill. So I think that we will have continuity if we ever actually pass this level. That means that we have the range set up we monitor from afar. But in all cases, the acceleration. Bearish also comes from a reflection that is being carried out on China, in which, yes or no, China will be able to absorb sufficient demand for oil, and therefore pricing is being done. I think we will have to let this end of the year close at the level of oil to really have a long-term trend, and necessarily behind a long-term inflation which will resume the tendency of oil to decline, so it will be much simpler to do. Our forecasts. In terms of BTC, we had a fairly aggressive little candle, let's say today, but it was more or less expected when we look at what we have had for some time. I present to you elsewhere for about a week. We have been in roughly this pattern, with an RSI that is falling, alongside a price that is growing, therefore necessarily a bearish divergence, with a grinding of volume that is in progress to do too. So there we are more or less in this little dip. We are in a retracement phase, in which for me we should have a bullish reacceleration for a liquidity gain before having either a reversal or a retest. The retest that we have been waiting for some time. When we look at the short term, this is what I explained to you yesterday. We already had a bearish intention which was very marked with the taking of this low, in which we saw that we were not able to rebuild good structures to return to rise, and I told you that if we were going to look for this low, we were going to have a very strong bearish acceleration. The same on this one, that we were inevitably going to recover that, and that for the moment we were going to at least look for this one there, or even potentially those, okay? Well, these are still intact, which is a bit of a shame because when we look at the head of the liquidity, we can see that there is still a big pulse in the 34,000, very large liquidity, which is on time. So for me, I am more inclined to tell you that we will have a bullish breath before potentially going to look for them. So there we will have a movement which should resemble hop. I am withdrawing everything just to show you. A movement which should look like this. Here we are going to retest, we fill the imbalance, and then we are going to get the liquidity from 34,000, so we are going to liquidate this whole part. Then we make an accumulation and we leave, so that would be a somewhat ideal scenario that many are currently pricing, including me. But that doesn't change the fact that we still liquidated some of the people. We are already at the level of the oversold RSI. We went through once, twice. Well, that doesn't mean not to say that we cannot continue to push bearish. But it is important to understand that it is rather logical there, this breathing. We are in a form of temporization in which we will, in fact, quite simply liquidate the bullish movements that we had here. Grinding. Because there we have an impulsive upward movement. There we have grinding, okay? When we have that, we actually have a liquidity construct. And when we actually see the open interest, we see that the open interest is still falling. And even to go further, when we look at the CVD perp collapsed. What does that mean? This means that we actually entered all the limit orders here, and that there were 0 aggressive orders. So here we are in the liquidation clusters, which is rather classic. And we see that the two CVDs, whether spot and perp, are in the process of breaking their low, so we are really in a market in which currently, this acceleration too, we are losing momentum. We are less and less aggressive, which is rather logical. I remind you once again that psychologically, why are we pushing here? Because quite simply, we have the rumor of a validation of the BTC ETFs from BlackRock, etc. So here we are, really in this process of pure and hard rumors. Have we heard anything about this rumor? No, we didn't get anything. All we need to do is once again have a new rumor arrive. We will have an acceleration of BTC, which will leave with a liquidation of all the shorts. For me, here we are in a zone which is relatively interesting. I expect that we will perhaps retest the 34,000 a little lower at a minimum before starting again on a final upward acceleration, before have this breathing strong enough, much stronger, for the notion of selling the news. Don't forget that I am still in this dynamic there. By the rumor, sell the news. And moreover, if ever, here we take a little step back. We are going to change the graph. We are going, get on this one, we're just going to zoom in a little bit, where we're going to project ourselves, where we'll have an indication. For me, if we are led to break without having the validation of the ETFs, here the 33,400, then we are in fact breaking the structure that we have put in place here, which is very important. This implies that here we will certainly have the news of validation, which will arrive in the hours/days that follow. Okay? So expect, if we ever break this level, to certainly have the beginning of news on the validations of ETFs in which, at that moment, we will have a big green candle certainly, which will certainly be swallowed up subsequently before having a retest here from 31,000 to 32,000, which is the rather classic level. In all cases, the more we trace, the more you have the possibility of being able to recharge on certain receptions, on certain cryptos in which we still find ourselves in areas that are relatively nice. When we look here at the level of the total, therefore the entire crypto stock market, of the crypto stock market totalization, in which we are really in a very important resistance zone, we see that we have a lot of difficulty working on this part. The same on total 3, we see that we are arriving in a very, very strong resistance zone. And what is interesting is that in terms of dominance, we see several things that are in progress. To do without, we have the dominance of BTC, which continues to collapse, Ethereum, which is also struggling. On the other hand, we see the dominance of altcoins minus everything that is stablecoin. We see that it is growing. So this means that we have altcoins which are breathing and taking liquidity from BTC, which is rather positive. On the other hand, it is classic BTC dominance falling, transfer of liquidity to Ethereum and the altcoins. Then we know the rest. It's up to you. Prepare and have your work areas. That's the most important thing, is to always have your work areas. I hope you liked this video. If so, don't forget to leave me a like and a comment. It supports the channel. It supports the work that I do, and it always makes me very happy, especially since I read all your comments and I respond to almost all your comments. I think you noticed it. And we meet at 13:30 to talk about AVAX Avalanche and potentially Avalanche 2, which they have started to announce.